Tutorial Podcast, a podcast offering discussions and tutorials on nerdy subjects for people who aren't necessarily nerdy themselves. With you today, myself, is your nerdy dude George. With me here today, the madam in the portrait, my mom.
Hey, I'll be the madam in the portrait.
She guards the door.
It would be so cool. Well, okay.
It'd be kind of interesting.
I can't sing, but because she sings.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it'd be a fun job.
So we're continuing our discussion on Harry Potter, and I think after this one discussion here, I kind of want to do this again for the other movies too, the other books almost. But maybe that's something for later down the line, even.
Yeah, and if we were going to do it, you certainly wouldn't do all of them, but which ones would you do?
Oh, I'd have to do Goblet of Fire just because I hate the movie so much.
I didn't enjoy that particular book either. I think it's filled with too much angst.
I like the book.
It's book number 4.
It's book number 4. I like the book. I just don't. I like the book. I don't care for the movie, and I don't care for the movie because from some of the other aspects that we'll talk about here. But the book is kind of a little dense in some cases.
Yep.
But it doesn't do a very good job.
It has to lob whole portions off to make it work.
It does, and but one of the big problems with the first movie is it starts a lot of threads and never actually does anything with them.
You never see the people from the other schools again.
Well, you don't see it. Well, not only so much that you don't see other people from the schools, but like you have entire sub elements on there that don't really add a whole lot to the movie, or the books in those cases.
Well, I want to know if Hagrid really forms a long-term relationship with the other giant.
That would be kind of nice, but I mean, in my example, obviously, it's just going to be Chang Cho, where like Harry's crushing on her at the end of the day. But like that doesn't really serve an integral plot of the movie outside of showing that Harry.
You do see it again in 5 a little bit.
A very, very minor little bit, but mostly when you see it in 5, it's this notion that like
she's still grieving,
and it's just like oh, but it's like but like it doesn't feel necessary at the end of the day as much as something like.
Well, I don't want to spoil it, but you never see. I didn't really feel like they developed Harry's final relationship. Romantic relationship all that well either.
No, but I think at the same time, that
I don't want to spoil that.
No, me neither. I mean, again, my personal pet peeve with that movie is also Rita Skeeter, because they introduce her. She's occasionally there in the background, but she does absolutely nothing. She's not doing anything.
She's in the book.
She's in the book, but when she's in the book, she plays an important role in the book.
Yeah.
Not an important role, but a good sub. But there's always like these little ongoing stories that are kind of happening in the background, which is kind of nice because it fleshes out that it's not all about just whatever the main plot is. There's these other subplots kind of happening.
There are all sorts of side tangents.
But like,
got to save the Griffin.
You got to save the not the troll, not the gnomes, or
no the
house elves.
Yeah, save the house elves. House elves,
for example,
and house elves don't appear in the first book.
No,
and yet you learn that they always kind of existed.
Mm-hmm. And then or the ghosts in a lot of cases, like. But no, again, like Rita Skeeter plays. It's not an important role, but like she plays like a nice background role.
Well, she doesn't come around until 5.
No, she's in the fourth book. She's introduced in the 4th book, but then she becomes kind of like your extra character on the back end for other books because she's the one who writes for the Daily Prophet and adds kind of these extra articles in there and stuff. So like she's not a major or important character, but she's kind of like a fun background character.
Well, okay, so let's talk about book 1 and some fun background characters that get developed in the book but don't get developed in the movie.
Oh, okay. Well, So let's do a quick outline of the first book in case you weren't aware of it. It was the homework here for this week. So primarily this should really just be...
If you were reading, you didn't finish it. It's a long book. If you were listening, though, I found I got through the listen in just a couple of days. I had a trip about an hour away each way, and then rode the stationary bike for an hour, a little over an hour at a shot. And had it done within like maybe 5 or 6 hours.
It's an 8. So the Audible version is 8 hours.
Okay, so I play Audible at 1.25 speed.
Oh, okay.
Which is actually works very well.
I'll think about that in the future. I mean, I like the Audible version because like the person who did the narration for it, the for it at the end of the day.
Does voices.
Tried to do all the voices and had like different little ways of doing it, and I can almost see their version of the voices when I see the movie as well.
Yeah.
So as a quick rundown here, like, you know, the beginning of the book shows like the Dursleys in the tired of Wizarding World, happy about he who not shall be named defeat, and then Harry gets dropped off with the Dursleys. Then it goes all about this how badly Harry's treated and how weird things happen with Harry.
Chapter 1 is weird owls flying all over the place and
wizards kind of on the streets, nearly giving away the game.
Yeah, they're in cloaks, and Mr. Dursley, notices them because it's so weird to see people in these odd clothing.
Yep.
And the owls make the news. There were owls all over the place during the day.
Yep.
And so the owls
fireworks into the evening.
Yeah, the owls even make the news. They're weird shooting stars, and so you sort of see some interaction between the Muggle, the wizards living, the magical world living amongst the Muggle world.
Yeah.
And you get some background on maybe why Mrs. Dursley's sister is
not well liked by Mrs. Dursley.
Yeah, and he even asks her, he sees all these odd goings on and says, "Have you heard from your sister lately?" And she cringes and says, "No."
With the end of the chapter literally being Harry being dropped off on the doorstep and kind of mentioning a whole bunch of stuff, it's a nice foreshadowing that they have there at that scene.
Yep.
Then
it's all set up very nicely.
Yeah, and then the second chapter is literally how poorly Harry is treated. Like
lives in a cupboard under the stairs.
He's talked about negatively. Like even though he's just there in the room, like he's not there in the room.
He's forced to cook breakfast for them.
He was originally supposed to go to another lady's house because it's their son's birthday. It's Dudley, because it's
Dudley's birthday.
Dudley's birthday, and how dare they have to take him as well to the zoo, and and it basically just kind of shows why the family is kind of weary of Harry for the most part, because weird things do happen when he's around.
Yep.
Even unintentionally. The third chapter is
because he has no idea.
No, he has no idea what's happening, and again, they just blame him out of spot, and Harry's just like, I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
It's like you caused all the problems. Like, but what did I? So
yeah.
Then you've got the third chapter, which is basically all about the letters and Mr. Dursley's stern intent to try to avoid the letters. Like,
and the letters are from Hogwarts, School of Witchcraft and Wizardry,
and following them everywhere.
But Harry's not allowed to read them.
Nope. Harry.
So he has no idea what it's about. He only knows it's being sent to him. And first it's one letter, and then it's 5 letters, and then and Dursley nails the mail slot shut, and then it's more letters coming in through window slots, and he nails the window slots shut, and then it's letters flying out of the fireplace. And he decides they have to go someplace, and he ends up taking them. They're all like Dudley and Mrs. Dursley are worried about him.
Yeah,
he ends up taking them
to a hotel originally.
Well, a cabin out on an island that they have to row a boat to get to.
But they go to a hotel first.
Oh, they go to a hotel first. Yeah.
And when they get to the hotel, the letters
still find them.
The letters are like, hey, there's a letter for a Mr. Potter. Is that? Or an H. Potter, is that anybody here? And he's like, no, burn it. And then that's when they end up going out to the cabin that's on an island that's like out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded all by water.
It's cold and wet and damp, and it's a storm.
Oh, yes. Chapter 4 is literally Hagrid's introduction as the Keeper of Keys.
Yep.
Groundskeeper. Introduces Harry to the notion that he's a wizard. Hates, just like...
Actually introduces a lot, because you get Gringotts.
Well, so that doesn't happen until the next chapter, technically. Okay. So, but he introduces Harry to, like, Harry is a wizard, I'm Hagrid, like, the Dursleys are have, made a grave misfortune of not telling you about who you actually are or anything about
who your parents
were or anything like,
or how they actually died, because he's been told they died in a car crash, and that's not true.
No, but even Hagrid doesn't really go to the full details of what happened either.
Right.
And then eventually he just takes Harry with him, and they travel to London to go to Diagon Alley.
Yeah.
And that's where he gets kind of the full introduction to the Wizarding world.
And he really finds out that he's famous.
Yeah, because he walks into the Leaky Cauldron and everyone's just like, Harry Potter. It's as if they just saw.
Shake your hand. Let me take my picture with you. Let me
get a selfie. But those didn't. Now keep in mind, the film literally doesn't. No, they never
doesn't do any of that.
Well, doesn't do any of that.
We can talk. Well, let's outline the chapters, and then we can go through where the film doesn't. Because the film doesn't lots, and I hadn't realized that. So the
fifth chapter here again is also going into Gringotts, and also where Hagrid picks up a mysterious package while they're getting money for Harry to go buy wizarding tools and supplies.
Yeah, so they go to 2 vaults.
Mm-hmm. This is also where Harry gets his wand and gets his owl.
And in the movie, okay, we can talk about this later. They have to take mining carts down.
I got that impression in the book too.
Well, in the book, I knew it was mining carts. In the movie, it looked a little bit like a Disney ride.
It does, yeah. Chapter 6 is all about Harry getting to Hogwarts. He meets Fred and George Weasley, who were the first to recognize him.
He has no idea how to get to the train platform. Matter of fact, the Dursleys actually take him in the book. The Dursleys actually take him to the train station, and Mr. Dursley even puts his stuff on a cart and walks in with him just to show him that there is no platform 9 3/4. There's a platform 9, there's a platform 10, but there is no platform 9 3/4, and he leaves laughing.
Yeah. So he meets the Weasleys. George and Fred are the first to recognize him, and then eventually Ron is his first friend on the train. Technically, during this chapter, this is where they also meet Draco Malfoy. Now, Harry had met Draco when he was getting his uniform originally, but just didn't realize who he was.
They didn't say names.
They didn't say names. And
he gets his wand, though. And one of the things we learn, this is going back to Diagon Alley, one of the important things we learn, which is true throughout the book and plays into some of the final
elements of later chapters,
later books, is Ollivander tells him the Phoenix who gave this feather only gave one other, and it's in the
wand of Voldemort at the end.
It's in the wand of the person who gave you that scar.
It's the sister or brother wands.
Yeah.
So it's a nice parallel at the end of the day.
Yeah. So it's an interesting scene because you see Ollivander trying to find him a wand, and he tries out several. In the book, he tries out
like a dozen. And mind you, every single time he just hands it to Harry. Harry holds onto it for like half a second. He's like, "Nope, not that one."
Yeah,
and then pulls out, goes find another one here. Yeah. Hold this. No, okay, not that either. And it's like, he was trying on shoes or something, and like he was like, "Here, nope, that doesn't look like your foot size."
You see him go, I wonder, Ollivander, I wonder, and then he pulls that wand.
Yeah,
it's a neat scene.
I find the way that they did it in the movie a lot more interesting, actually.
I like the way,
but I wonder if that was the common case of all wands, that like you would not have like a room in which you would just like prepare for like disaster to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it seems like, if you were just getting wands like that all the time, I mean, you would just like...
Yeah, so in the movie, Harry swishes the wand and something blows up.
Something blows up, or like...
Something goes flying.
Things shoot off the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like...
Yeah. And that was exactly what happened when we went to Universal Osaka. And we went into the Ollivander's, and somebody tried out a wand, and things were flying off the wall, and shooting out of things.
Yeah, it was very much the same magical sort of experience.
Yeah.
So Harry meets Ron on the train. He also meets Hermione, which is their first encounter with a know-it-all. By number 7, that's where they reach the castle finally of Hogwarts. They go across the lake here by boat, and then get sorted into their different houses. Harry initially thinks, "Oh, Slytherin, you definitely be good for Slytherin." And Harry's like, "No, not anything but Slytherin."
Not
he's,
he's literally saying not Slytherin.
Yeah, and then he's like, "Oh, okay, well, Gryffindor." It's where you also start getting introduced to some of the teachers as well. Mm-hmm. So you see a whole bunch of the other teachers.
You did meet Quirrell in the Leaky Cauldron.
You do meet Quirrell in the Leaky Cauldron, yes. So let's see here. Chapter 8 is kind of going through like the day in the life of Harry as a student, going to his different classrooms, getting like kind of enchanted by all the stuff that's happening around him. But then he meets Snape, the potions master, but also the House of Slytherin, and Snape's big deal is that like, oh look, our newest celebrity.
He already doesn't like him.
No, and deducts points from Harry for not knowing stuff that
hasn't been taught yet.
Hasn't been taught yet. Although Hermione is like amazingly eager, just like, ooh, I know that.
She's got her hand like she couldn't get the hand any higher without leaving her chair.
Or I don't think if she could, she would have rose that hand all the way up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
But no, yeah. So it really kind of sets out Snape as kind of the antagonist for the book, or the intended antagonist. So then you've got chapter 9 here, where... So this is kind of where the movie starts diverting from the original book, where Draco kind of tricks Harry into going into a wizard's duel in the trophy room at night.
Yeah.
And so Harry and Ron are dressed and ready to go to the trophy room, as where Hermione's trying to like, no, don't go. It's a trap. It's a trap, but at the same time, I mean, like, you could get expelled.
Yeah. And
eventually they meet Neville Longbottom, who's also outside. So they get out of the Gryffindor tower, but when Hermione tries to go back, the fat lady's actually visiting somebody else in another painting, so she's not there to let them back in. And they find Neville outside as well, who I think was actually asleep initially at the point.
Yeah.
Who also got locked out by accident because the fat lady wasn't there. By that point here, they end up getting caught by Mrs. Norris, which is the
cat.
The cat for Finch, who is the
groundskeeper.
Was also a groundskeeper, but he's more like the
house groundskeeper.
House groundskeeper, yeah. And so they're running away from Mrs. Norris, and eventually they come across, and then so they're sneaking through different passageways. They're getting lost, and they eventually find themselves on the third floor corridor. Now,
which is forbidden.
Now, prior, Albus Dumbledore had said, "I wanted to say a few words," and he just mentioned some random words, and then he went on by saying, "But no, seriously, you can't go into the forbidden forest. That's out of bounds. First years are not allowed to have brooms, and the third floor corridor is out of bounds.
Yeah.
Anybody who goes there will die a horrible, terrifying death." And this is where they meet Fluffy, a three-headed dog.
They don't know its name is Fluffy yet, though.
But
I like that scene.
Its technical name is Cerberus, but I mean, Fluffy, I think, sounds a little bit better.
It's a massive three-headed dog. It's not just a three-headed dog. It's a three-headed dog the size of a small house.
Oh, I was going to say a medium-sized house, but I mean,
it's a big dog.
It's a big dog. Eventually, they are able to get back to, so they do dodge Finch and his cat, Mrs. Norris, and then eventually you're able to get back into the room, back into Gryffindor Tower. But as a result of that, like, they've pissed off Hermione, who is just like, want nothing to do with you guys. You guys are absolutely mad. Which is not incorrect on her part.
Yeah.
Come time for Halloween, a troll is let loose into the castle, into the dungeons.
A troll in the basement, in the dungeons,
and eventually makes its way up there. And
but in the meantime,
mm-hmm.
Ron and Harry have been overheard by Hermione talking about Hermione
mm-hmm.
being a know-it-all and not liking her.
Yeah, not liking her.
Yeah,
and she's taking this rather personally.
And she's taking this very personally.
Mm-hmm. And so she's
that know-it-all that always tries too hard.
Yeah.
And it isn't that she's a know-it-all with ill intent. She just doesn't understand why everybody else doesn't know it all.
Yeah, or doesn't know when to just try to like let it go.
Yeah.
So she's actually dismissed herself from dinner because this is all happening during dinner to go to the bathroom. And it's presumed that she's in the bathroom crying, to hide herself, because that's when she's overheard them saying that as well.
Well, even some girls say that she's in the bathroom crying.
Yeah. In the meantime, so Professor Quirrell comes up into the hall and announces that there's a troll, and so all the prefects are to take all
and then promptly passes out.
Yeah. And then he's to then the leaders of each of the houses are supposed to take the students back to their individual dormitories. So the Gryffindors are supposed to go back up to the tower. Ron and Harry are kind of worried about Hermione, so they go to kind of find her.
They suddenly realize as they're being led back up to the tower that Hermione doesn't know because Hermione wasn't at dinner.
Yeah, she was at she was in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And they see the troll there, and they're actually the troll goes into the bathroom, where they don't realize it's the bathroom. There's like, oh, we'll lock the troll in there. So they lock the troll in the room. Come to hear a scream inside the room. Oh, that's the women's bathroom.
Hermione's in there.
A fight ensues, and eventually, like, Ron and Harry are able to knock out the troll.
They're able to levitate the troll's club, and then drop it on his head.
Because Hermione had actually corrected them in the class just before dinner.
Earlier in the day
about it.
Matter of fact, the class that they were complaining about her about. Yes.
And so after that point, Hermione actually just becomes their best friend. She's like, she
lies to save them.
She lies to save them because they were out there trying to save her, versus she goes to the point of saying, no, I thought I would be good enough to be a forest troll. They're dumb and stupid after all. And I just wasn't smart enough for it. And Ron and Harry knew that and came to stop me and help me.
Came to save me, yeah.
And they ended up saving me as a result. And so, one of the things that also gets kind of pointed out here, which is the house points as well. They keep mentioning plus and minuses on house points throughout the entire book.
Yep.
And so they're mentioning
because the House Cup is awarded at the end of the year. It's a big thing.
And it's a big deal. So they're constantly
and Slytherin has won it 6 years in a row.
Yes. And so there's a big thing about how points being given and taken throughout the entire book.
Right.
It comes up to be a slightly bigger point a little bit later on. From that point, again, Hermione is now Harry and Ron's best friend. She's constantly helping them with their homework and making sure she won't give them the ansers. But she'll tell them she'll tell them if they're right or if they're right or wrong on that.
She'll make them do the work.
Mm-hmm. So by this point here, Harry's they're going to their broom class so they can learn how to fly brooms.
Yep.
Their
first broom class.
Their first broom class.
And these are school brooms that they're learning on.
Yep. So they're not like the best of the best. They're just like remedial brooms, as one would do in a financial institution.
Yep.
Everybody's broom. And it's discovered that Harry is a
clean sweep.
Oh,
sorry.
I love the names for them sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's found out that Harry's actually really good at riding a broom.
He's a natural,
even though he's never done it.
Yeah, because Neville's grandmother has sent him
Remember All, which is a little ball that kind of reminds you when you forgot something.
And Neville has lost both his parents too.
Yes.
Also to Voldemort.
To
Death Eaters, yeah.
Which comes up to be a bigger point later on.
Yeah.
So he's received this here, and in the process, Neville gets hurt at one point, trying to kick up off of his broom, and he falls off of it and hurts himself. When the process of hurting himself, he's taken over to the hospital wing.
By the teacher,
but he drops his Remember All while he was there. Draco picks it up and is basically like, I think I'll just hide this somewhere and so that he can't find it at all. He'll forget about it eventually anyways, won't he? And Harry eventually chases after Draco Malfoy.
Draco takes off on his broom.
Mm-hmm. And Harry does the same as well to go get them Remember All. While in the process of flying around to go, Draco tosses it at one point and Harry goes and grabs it out of the air.
Because it's glass and it could break.
Mm-hmm. But Professor McGonagall sees this. And very sternly is like, Potter, come with me now. And so the two of them disappear from class.
and Malfoy's just smiling ear to ear.
You're getting expelled. Meanwhile, McGonagall, who again is the Gryffindor head of the Gryffindor house, goes to another classroom and steals another student out there.
Wood.
And basically Woods is like, what did I do now? And eventually she looks at Wood and is like, look, I found you a seeker. And Harry's like, I'm sorry, what now? But then Woods is like, oh. And this is where, and so this entire chapter is kind of about how...
She's a natural.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so this is the chapter where Harry learns about Quidditch, and he learns about his role as a seeker, which is just a guy who just catches this weird flying gold orb. I mean,
and that his father was one as well.
I don't think that one comes up in this movie. I think that one comes up in later books, but it's mentioned in the movie though.
Okay.
Because keep in mind that when the movie came out, it was 2001. The Goblet of Fire had actually just been released in 2000. Which is the first three books had been written in 2000, 97, 98, 99, and then the Goblet of Fire came out in 2001, that same year. So they were able to incorporate some of the stuff that had happened in the earlier
setup for it.
The setup that would happen in later movies. They were able to introduce it earlier on. As a result of, so
they actually reorder a couple of things in this book in the movie.
Yeah, so it plays out a little bit differently. Harry ends up becoming the seeker for the team. He gets a new broom, a Nimbus 2000, which is the latest model.
It gets delivered to him.
Mm-hmm. And first years are not allowed to have brooms, technically.
Right.
So it gets delivered to him, and he actually has to take it back up to his dormitory so that because he doesn't know what it is initially. Like in the movie, like it's
very obvious.
It's kind of obvious what it is, but like they bring it back up to the dormitory, and then that's where he opens it up at, because again, first years are not supposed to have.
And it's
brooms.
a Nimbus 2000, which we learned from his trip on Diagon Alley is the best broom, the newest model.
They have a Quidditch tournament where, so it's Harry's first Quidditch tournament, and Harry actually at one point here gets his broom bewitched by what looks like Snape.
Snape's uttering
chants, and
Hermione can see his lips moving across the stands.
And so Harry's just kind of drifting higher and higher and higher up the air, into the air with his broom, just kind of like bucking him at that point.
Yeah.
And Hermione, and the intention actually ends up coming is like George and Fred actually get underneath Harry, because if Harry falls, he'll have a lot of damage. George and Fred are actually Ron's older brothers, who are also beaters.
Twins,
beaters on the team,
and they're hovering underneath him
to try to make sure that he gets saved if he gets hurt at all.
Yeah.
Eventually, Hermione goes over and puts a fire underneath Snape's feet,
lights his robes,
which breaks his eye contact, and Harry regains control of his broom, only enough to see the golden snitch, and he starts plummeting toward the ground to catch it, and he accidentally swallows it, coughs it back up, and then the game is over, because if you catch the snitch, the game just ends.
And the snitch is the little gold ball with wings.
It's about the size of a golf ball.
Yeah, and it actually has a bit of personality to it.
Mm-hmm. It just zips around wildly. It's
but you almost feel like it's more of an animal than a ball.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. So after Quidditch, it's Christmas time. Now everyone's going to go back home for Christmas. Ron, the Weasley family, though, the parents are actually going on holiday to go visit their brother Charlie, who deals with dragons.
Who lives in Romania.
Mm-hmm. And so they're all going to stay at the school instead. Harry gets presents who has never gotten presents for Christmas at all.
Never ever gotten a gift.
Except for, I think Dudley's old clothing, because again, all of his clothing, is, 5 sizes too big for
Well, they were actually... Miss Dursley was going to actually dye Dudley's old clothing as a school uniform for Harry had he not gone to Hogwarts.
Mm-hmm. It was going to dye it gray.
Yeah.
And it was that particular scene in the book, she's like, oh, the smell. It's it's because of you. I was like, well, nobody told you to dye these clothes gray. You could have just gone and bought some. I was like, no. So the big deal with during Christmas here is that Harry gets presents. Now he gets presents from Ron's mother, who knits him an emerald green sweater with a big H on it. But he also gets a present which belonged to his father.
Yeah.
Which is this invisibility cloak.
And the card says
it belonged to your father who left.
You left it in my possession.
Mm-hmm. Before he died, it figured it was about time that it got returned to its rightful owner. And so Harry grabs it, and by this point here,
and they've never seen. Ron's heard of them, but they've never seen them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this one, and Harry, puts it on, and his feet's gone, but again, they're invisible at that point.
Yeah.
What's kind of happened in the meantime here is that after the Quidditch match, Harry, Ron, and Hermione are talking to Hagrid about, Snape's trying to hurt Harry, and Hagrid's very much about like, no, Snape's
he's a teacher.
He's a teacher. He wouldn't do anything like that. He's here to help you guys. He's here protecting stuff. It's like, what is he protecting? And Hagrid eventually mentions, well, it's none of your business. The only persons whose business is Albus Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel, because he just lets off this name.
Well, it's also the same scene in which they find out the name of the dog.
Oh yes, it's also where they find out that his name is Fluffy as well.
The look on Ron's face.
Mm-hmm. This is
Fluffy.
Like, Fluffy. I was like, well, come on, what else are you going to call a dog?
Yeah.
And so So up until Christmas, they've been looking in the library every time during break to try to find this name Nicholas Flamel, to figure out who it is. And so the concern, though, is that maybe it's in the restricted section. Well, first years are not allowed in the restricted section for kind of obvious reasons. That's why.
But the whole time, once Harry learns the name, he's like, I've heard that somewhere. And for some reason, I remember
hearing it somewhere.
Somewhere. Can't remember.
Can't remember where it is, but I've heard the name. It's something important.
Yeah.
It's somebody important even.
Yeah.
And so eventually, with Harry with this invisible cloak, figures out, oh hey, I can. If nobody sees me, I can then travel into the restricted section and look at the books there, and nobody will know I'm there.
Right.
Well, Harry picks up a book that somehow, when he opens it, starts screaming at him. He puts it away right away, but in the process, practically wakes up the entire castle, and that causes
certainly brings Mrs. Norris
and Finch to the library. But Harry, underneath the invisibility cloak, nobody can see him, and he ducks into.
Snape comes in there too.
Snape's looking for him as well. But there's a bunch of teachers, I think, looking for him at that point. And he darts into a vacant classroom, and that's where he finds the Mirror of Erised.
Yeah.
And in looking in the mirror, it shows him what he wants most of all in life. His
entire family. In the book, it's his entire family.
And more predominantly, his mother and father.
Right.
Harry runs up and gets Ron, brings Ron down. It's like, look, it's my parents. It's like, no, and Ron goes, no, that's me. I'm head boy, which is like the head kid for the entire school. I'm also captain of the Quidditch team, of the house Quidditch team, and I've won the house cup, and I've won the Quidditch championship as well. Like, look how recognized I am, and look how handsome I look too. It's like, so Harry eventually, they both go back up to bed that night, but Harry keeps making secret trips back down to the mirror to stare at the reflection of his parents, because he's never seen the reflection of his parents before, and the rest of his family. And then the last day that he does that, Albus Dumbledore is there.
Towards the end of the Christmas thing. Yeah.
And so Albus, or Dumbledore lets him know that, like, hey, the mirror shows you what you most want in life.
What you most desire.
But this mirror doesn't give us any wisdom, it doesn't give us any knowledge. This is a mirror that will just preoccupy your time forever. So you need to stop thinking about this mirror and let it go. We're moving it, so don't try to find it again.
Yeah.
Because no happiness actually ever
comes from it.
People
have wasted their whole lives in front of it.
So after Christmas here, they return back to school. And so there's kind of a little bit of series of events that kind of happen here. The trio learn about who Nicholas Flamel is, and they learn about the Philosopher's Stone.
And how do they learn who Nicholas Flamel is?
So Harry remembers that when he was on the train, he bought a whole bunch of sweet candies,
chocolate frogs, which come with wizard cards.
And on the wizard card at the back, it outlines kind of Albus Dumbledore's sort of hallmark, sort of things that he did. And one of the things there is that it mentions Nicholas Flamel on there,
the alchemist Nicholas Flamel.
And so eventually they find out who Nicholas Flamel is, who's created the only known Philosopher's Stone in existence still. And so they've rationalized that that's what's being hidden there. Well, meantime, the
stone gives eternal life.
The stone has a couple different properties. It can turn any metal into gold. It can it basically kind of is a shortcut to magical elixirs at the end of the day. Uh-huh. One of the things it can do is it can create a magical elixir that makes you immortal if you keep drinking it long enough.
So Nicholas Flamel is over 600 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not a bad timeline.
Yeah.
So as a result, they go to Hagrid, who is in possession of a dragon's egg. Now,
dragon's egg,
which is not legal to have, strictly speaking.
Not legal to have dragons, except in Romania.
Well, dragon, you have to have a license to be able to work with dragons, and you can't just freely trade in dragon stuff because obviously dragons are very hard to control.
Plus, muggles might see them. They're hard
to keep. Yeah, so
hard to keep quiet.
So they're in kind of remote places. In a lot of cases, like Romania. So while they're all these kind of series events are kind of all happening kind of around the same time, where they learn about the Philosopher's Stone and they're talking with Hagrid, and in the process of talking with Hagrid, when they learn about the egg, Draco Malfoy watches and sees the egg as well and runs back.
He snuck out of the castle.
He snuck out of the castle as well, and has seen the dragon's egg too. In the book, what ends up happening is over the course of a couple weeks, the dragon has hatched and starting slowly getting bigger and bigger, to the point where even Hagrid's like, okay, yeah, it's too big for me.
I can't feed it.
I can't feed it. It's too big in here. We need to take it somewhere else. So Ron offers to, sends an owl to his, mind you, owls are how you get letters around everywhere.
Yeah. They're the mail service.
Sends an owl to his brother Charlie, who's agreed, yeah, I'll send some guys over to come pick it up from Hogwarts. And so what ends up happening here is that in the process of trying to, is that when Ron, Harry, and Hermione leave to go get the dragon from Hagrid they're going to take it to the astronomy spire. Neville tries to stop them, and there's like, no, Neville. And so Neville goes and runs to one of the teachers. Meanwhile, Draco Malfoy, who has overheard what they're planning to do to help the dragon, is waiting by the astronomy tower. But Harry and Hermione, because Ron has actually been bitten by the dragon and goes to the hospital wing earlier that day.
Yeah.
So Harry and Hermione are underneath the invisibility cloak with the dragon in a crate. And they're going up the astronomy tower. They pass by as Draco's being dragged away by Mrs. McGonagall, who's caught him out of bed at nighttime. Harry and Hermione are able to get the dragon up to the astronomy tower. That gets picked up. And as they're coming back down, they forgot to bring the invisibility cloak and wear it on their way down, and also get caught by Mrs. McGonagall, by Fitch.
Yeah.
Who takes them to McGonagall. And so, as a result, McGonagall takes away 50 points each from Harry, Hermione, Neville, and I think Draco as well, for all being out of bed at nighttime, which is against the rules. And they're all sentenced to detention as well. And actually what ends up happening here is that during this point here, Harry's a bit of a pariah because eventually it's learned that he lost like 150 points for the house because of this. Because it's all presumed that like Neville and Hermione were actually trying to stop him.
Yeah.
There are
a lot of downsides to celebrity.
There is. So as a result, what ends up happening here is that they get sent to detention, And so Neville, Hermione, Draco, and Harry are sent with Hagrid into the Forbidden Forest because they found unicorn blood on the ground, and so they believe there's a unicorn that's been hurt and injured, and maybe potentially needs.
And they know that other unicorns have died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they need to put it out of its misery and try to find what's been doing that if they can. Along the way, even before they get into there, they actually meet a centaur who keeps going on about the stars, essentially.
Yeah. Centaurs can read the stars. They're mystics.
Yeah. So eventually, after a little series of events, it's Draco and Harry, as well as Hagrid's massive bull mastiff, I guess it is.
Yeah.
Who apparently is a coward, which is kind of like, I want the dog. It's like, fine, I'll just let
Fang.
you know
the dog's name is Fang.
The Fang. I want Fang. It's like, all right. Well, he's a coward.
Because what ends up happening is that they split and they go two different directions.
Yeah, they try to find it. And originally, what happened was originally Neville and Draco, but Draco kind of pulled a prank and scared Neville, and Neville shut up flares to be like, "Oh, hey, I'm here." And then, it was like, "Okay, fine." Harry and Draco, Neville, you'll stay with me, and Hermione.
Yeah.
Going into the forest, and they end up finding a creature crouched over a dead unicorn, drinking its blood. Draco and Fang run away as where Harry's kind of transfixed and scared of it.
Well, he's got a splitting headache.
Oh yeah, something's burning on his head.
Yeah.
Come to find, another centaur comes over and actually saves Harry at that point. And so
it's not the first centaur; it's a different centaur.
It's a completely different centaur. Yeah. This one who actually talks and doesn't talking about the astrological stuff. Because the other centaurs were transfixed about Mars is in a weird position, and it's like, okay,
strange things are happening.
Yeah. And so the other one kind of does some exposition about how drinking unicorn blood will save you if you're on the edge of life, but if you're on the edge of life, it curses you as a result because to kill something so
you have a half-life. Yeah.
You'll have a half-life, but to kill something so beautifully innocent curses you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So he lets Harry ride on his back as he brings him back to Hagrid for safety, which the other centaurs chide him for at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They go back up to the castle at this point here.
And the centaurs all know who Harry Potter is.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, they're very well aware of
who he is and why he's important.
Mm-hmm. So eventually, Harry kind of puts two and two together. It's like, wait a second, how did Hagrid get a dragon egg? He's what he's always wanted. Like, how did somebody just happen to have one traveling around? It seems a little too suspicious. And at this point, this is where they learned how Hagrid had actually given up the secret to how to get past Fluffy, which is apparently to play music. Or to play music to calm it down and make it go to sleep, I guess.
Right.
Eventually, they run to Mrs. McGonagall, asking her, like, "Hey, where is Dumbledore?" And Dumbledore, she's like, "We need to talk to Dumbledore." It's like, well, he went to London he was requested by the Ministry of Magic. And they're going on, and they eventually kind of led up on the notion, it's like, hey, we know about the Philosopher's Stone, and she's like, you will not be speaking of this again. It's in a very safe place. You don't need to worry about it. But they kind of believe that.
At this point, do they know that each professor has done a different spell?
Hagrid has mentioned is that each of the professors have helped out with the defense of it. This is why Snape is, this is why Hagrid always dismisses Harry's notion of like, Snape, no, he helped put up the defenses. Like, he's the good guy here. Keep in mind that there's been this, throughout the book, they've also had these little interactions with about Snape and Quirrell, where Snape is kind of towering over Quirrell and trying to get him to confess to something, or I'm
intimidating.
Yeah,
intimidating him, and
So it gives you this impression that
Snape has gotten bit by Fluffy
as well at one point.
Although that's not public knowledge, but it's
not public knowledge. Eventually, like, he's seen with a limp at one point, and
he's got a gash. And
Harry actually discovers him as he's going to. He had a book with him, and Snape took the book from him. He was going to go ask Snape to get the book back, and noticed that he was bandaging his leg and having an argument with Quirrell at that point.
Yeah.
To which he partly listened into. So, I mean, like, the book does a good job of really kind of describing how antagonistic Snape is to Harry by this point.
Yeah.
So the trio eventually realize that, hey, nobody's going to cut... Like, Voldemort's afraid of Dumbledore because he's the most powerful wizard ever, so he's not going to try to come into the school while Dumbledore isn't here. Dumbledore's not here anymore, so they basically figure out, it's like, okay, we have to go stop...
Tonight's the night.
Tonight's the night. We got to go stop Snape from taking the Philosopher's Stone. They come across... They're literally waiting for everybody to leave the dormitory. Great room so they can leave. So there's a plausible deniability. Neville catches them on the way out, and they actually petrify Neville and go up to the third floor corridor. So there's a bunch of puzzles that there's left in the way there. So the first puzzle is Fluffy, and he's guarding a trap door, and so they eventually get down the trap door and succeed in getting there. Then there is the herbology teacher has left a very nasty plant, which Hermione is able to land on and then quickly gets off of it, and then when the vines actually start trying to get Harry and Ron, and she pulls out her wand and shoots it with fire, and the fire is like...
because she remembers in a herbology class hearing that it was afraid of fire.
She actually read about it. And so she read about it, and so she saves the two boys. They go into the next room, which has nothing but floating keys everywhere out with wings. And there's a leftover broomstick to go and grab the one key that will let them in. So Harry, being a seeker, rides the broom to go get the key. He tosses it over to Ron and Hermione while he's still dodging the other keys.
The keys don't want to be caught. And so they're flying...
They're flying away from Harry intentionally.
Very quickly.
Mm-hmm. So they eventually get into the next room, which is a massive chessboard. Now, during Christmas, Ron and Harry had been playing wizard's chess, where the pieces move and violently attack each other to break each other when they defeat each other.
Yeah, when you get captured, you get basically beheaded with a knife or a sword.
Yeah, and so they go to this just massive version of this instead.
Yeah, they're life size.
Well, more than life size.
More than life size.
They would be tiny by comparison to a lot of the pieces. Each one of the students takes over a different position on the board for a corresponding missing piece. And eventually, so Ron's actually fairly decent at chess, oddly enough.
Yeah, and so he's actually directing the chess game.
So he's directing the chess game, and he's directing everybody what to do. He finally gets to the point where it's like, okay, I need to put myself in check so the queen will come get me. I need to
sacrifice myself.
And in the process, the queen will come get me, sacrifice myself, and then Harry can basically put the king in checkmate at that point by moving across. So Ron ends up getting taken out. He's not badly hurt, but he's knocked out, essentially.
Yeah. So
he can't keep going.
Right.
The next room is supposed to be another troll, but this... so keep in mind, all the teachers have kind of left stuff. So the herbology teachers left the plants. Hagrid's left the Fluffy the dog. The charms teacher who's left the flying keys everywhere. Mrs. McGonagall, who's the transfiguration teacher, is transfigured the chess pieces.
Right.
Professor Quirrell is the defensive against the dark arts, and he's the one who's left behind a troll, which is kind of interesting how that's dark arts related.
Yeah.
So they're able to just bypass that one because that one's already knocked out. And then Snape's left a potion riddle. So he's left a riddle about 7 vials of potions, one of which is going to let you go through the door perfectly fine. 3 others are going to basically kill you, and 3 others are going to put you to sleep.
One lets you go through the door back.
Yeah, or one lets you go through the door back, and so
one lets you go through the door forward.
Mm-hmm.
Both doors are now flaming.
Yes. And so Hermione eventually takes one of the potions. Is this the one that I forget here whether she passes out from it? Because two of the potions will just put you to sleep.
Well, no, she goes backwards and goes to rescue Ron.
Oh, okay, so she goes and rescues Ron while Harry progresses forward. And then the last room was created by Dumbledore, and it's basically just the Mirror of Erised.
Yeah, you go down a set of stairs.
Mm-hmm. And there is the Mirror of Erised in a room, and Professor Quirrell is basically staring at the mirror and is like, I can see me holding the stone, but how do I get it? Harry interrupts him, and basically Harry's trying to, figure out what's going on here. And
it's you? You expected Snape.
I expected Snape, and so I was like, yeah, you would suspect Snape. He suspected me too, but nobody would ever, suspect cowarding, quarreling,
stammering, yeah.
He actually wraps up Harry in vines to stop him from progressing any forward. And
he also explains that it was him that was cursing Harry's broom.
Yeah.
In the earlier thing,
in Quidditch, and then he's also the same one.
Snape was saying counter curses.
Mm-hmm. And then he was also the one who let the troll into the school earlier on. Yeah. Eventually, a voice shrieks out, "Use the boy!" And so he grabs Harry and pulls him to the mirror. And in the mirror, again, because the mirror shows you the thing you want most.
He releases the vines.
He releases the vine, and he shows Harry, and again, the mirror shows whatever you want most. And at this point, what Harry wants most is to make sure the Quirrell doesn't get the stone. And so the mirror reflects that the stone is actually in Harry's pocket. And Harry kind of whisks his hand by his pocket, and it's like,
the stone is there.
It actually is there. Holy crap. And so Quirrell doesn't quite believe him. And
he asks Harry what he sees, and Harry says, I see myself, I'm best. He basically repeats Ron's
lie, essentially.
Yeah.
And
I'm best boy, I'm getting the house cup.
This disembodied voice is like, nah, it's a lie.
Yeah.
And after a little bit of back and forth, it is eventually revealed. So keep in mind, Professor Quirrell has this turban on his head.
Always wears the turban.
He didn't have the turban to begin with, though. When he first met him in the Leaky Cauldron, he didn't have the turban on.
Oh, I hadn't realized that.
Yeah, because it's not described with that turban on until later.
Okay.
But so he takes his turban off, and on the back of his head is what looks like to be another face. And this is Voldemort on the back of his head.
Yeah. It's really spooky, too.
Yeah, the movie does a great job of portraying this.
Yeah.
And he eventually figures out, Voldemort eventually tries to be like, there's no good, there's no evil, there's just power in those who don't, in those who would just kind of fight you for it.
And he finds host bodies.
Mm-hmm. He's finding host bodies. He's just on the very brink of life. That's why he's needed the unicorn blood. But he basically recognizes
Become to the dark side.
Become to the dark side. You can have power, prestige. Like, that's all we really need out of here. Because he realizes also that Harry's got the philosopher's...
It's very much a Luke Skywalker moment.
Oh, yeah. He realizes that Harry actually has the Philosopher's Stone at this point. But Harry's not giving up the game that he actually does or not.
Voldemort knows.
But Voldemort knows this. Basically orders Quiddle to go get the stone from Harry, because Harry has it.
In his pocket?
In his pocket, so Quirrell is actually, I think, choking him at this point. But as he goes to choke him, his hands are actually burning because of a charm or a protection spell that's inherently on Harry.
Yeah. He can't really touch him without feeling tremendous pain.
Yeah, and he's actually burning him, like fire almost. Eventually, Harry hugs Quirrell, and Quirrell starts basically gets burned really badly by Harry just kind of touching him.
Yeah.
To the point that he passes out and dies from the flames. But Voldemort's still there, and Harry's actually passed out here now at this point because
of what he's
done, of what protection he's used. He wakes up later in the hospital. Albus Dumbledore is there saying, "Hey, don't worry, I got there just in the nick of time to save you."
I realized what was happening.
Mm-hmm. And he goes about and he answers some of Harry's lingering questions, like, "Hey, why did Voldemort kill me?" And he's like, "I don't have the answer for you right now." And he's like, "Hey, well, why was it then when Professor Quirrell touched me, like he was hurt?" "Well, because you have a protection you have a protection spell on you. That is love.
Your mother loved you so much she gave her life to save you."
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of love is something that
transcends transcends magic on a certain level, to ward you against dark magic. And he also kind of gives a couple other hidden information. Like, "It was you who gave me the invisibility cloak." It's like, "Yeah, and I also got it from the astronomy tower and brought it back to you just in case you needed it." Because they use the invisibility cloak to get to the third floor at nighttime.
Yeah.
Because that's what you do with an invisibility cloak.
Oh, yeah.
And so, eventually the school year comes to an end. Dumbledore... Now, I want to say pity points, but it's not really pity points. Basically,
so Slytherins won the House Cup.
Slytherins basically won the House Cup. They're ahead by like 260 points versus Gryffindor's in like last place because of what Harry, Hermione, and Neville have been deducted points for. And so Professor Dumbledore gives points to Hermione for her cool thinking and rationale in the face of danger. Gives 50 points to Ron for his amazing game of wizard's chess. Gives 60 points to Harry for his unflinching bravery in the face of danger.
They are now tied.
They are now tied with Slytherin. And he gives 10 more points to Neville because according to Albus Dumbledore, it's one thing to stand in, it takes a lot of bravery and courage to stand up to your enemies. It takes an even greater amount to stand up to your friends. So as a result of Neville standing up to his friends to try to stop them from doing something horrible, from potentially getting themselves killed, he gives them another 10 points, which makes them win the House Cup. And then they say their final goodbyes. They go back to the station. The Dursleys are waiting for him there. Keep in mind, like Ginny, who is Ron's younger sister, a year younger, has basically been like, "It's Harry Potter. Oh, look, it's Harry Potter. Isn't he a celebrity?" kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Weasley is very much kind of like, "Well, did you have a good school year?" And like, Harry's thanking her for the sweater and the fudge. She meets Mr. and Mr. Dursley. And is like, "Oh, you have a wonderful kid." I was like, "Whatever."
Yeah.
And then Hermione kind of as an offhand mentions to Harry, it's like, "Hey, remember, if they give you any shit, you can give any trouble, you can use magic on them." And Harry's like, "Well, I'm not supposed to use magic outside of school." It's like, do you think they really know that rule?
Yeah.
So, and that's where the book leaves us off at.
Well, and the thing about Mrs. Weasley, she tells her kids on the first day when they meet at the train.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when they first meet Harry, don't stare at him. Don't it must be difficult to be
who he is.
To be who he is, and
she's very understanding.
Yeah, she actually has a lot of empathy for Harry.
And she kind of becomes like an aunt at a certain point. Like she becomes like Harry's like step aunt pretty much, because she really
pretty much ultimately the Weasleys pretty much become his step family.
Yeah,
they're pretty close to adopt him.
Yeah, I mean, Harry I think finds more comfort with them than he does with the Dursleys.
Oh yeah, much more.
Oh, very easily. So yeah, I mean, like the book's a pretty easy read. I think at the end of the day, it's well done in a sense where like it's relatively easy for a child to be able to read this without too much issue, I would think. Well,
there's some words. I
think if a 4th or 5th grade level, she should be able to read this.
There'd probably be some things you'd still look up. Here's my comment: is I've had the opportunity over the years to read really good prose,
mm-hmm.
and there are authors that are just so good at description and creating
atmosphere.
Yeah, and it's what makes Tolstoy a good author. It's I remember years ago when I was going to Morocco, I read a book by Edith Wharton, who had written Age of Innocence and was a marvelous writer at the turn of the century. And she had traveled in 1916 to Morocco as the guest of the governor's wife. And her description of Morocco, the book was worth it just for the adjectives that were used, just for the way things were described. It's the combination of words. And this is so J.K. Rowling is really good prose. It's really, really good prose. It's a page turner because you want to see where it's going, but it's not just the story; it's the way it's told.
Oh yeah,
and you
described
see it,
in the kind
you
of the
see it
events.
in that first chapter in which she's describing the Dursleys. You absolutely know who the Dursleys are.
Oh yeah,
and it's the way they're described, and the description of the cat, and the description of the weird people in cloaks, and the owls flying around, and all of that is so evocative that you want to know where it's taking you. It makes you curious for more, and that's a unique thing. So it isn't just the story that's being told; it's the way it's written.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you can see from just your description, this is a book with lots of little tangents that need balancing. Again, a lot like Tolstoy, but lots of little interwoven things,
elements that are kind of in the background that are not initially important, but kind of something that kind of draws your attention.
They give it texture, and in some ways, in other ways, they give it context, and so it's well written. And I remember when I was reading these with your youngest brother, that there were times when I would sneak the book out of the room and keep reading, and then the next day I'd be reading again what I'd read the night before because I'd read ahead because I wanted to know where it was going.
Yeah.
And so it's really well written, and I think that's what makes it an easy read, because these are long books.
Oh, yeah. Well, this first book, not so much, but the later ones get longer and longer.
Even this first one's got to be 300, 400 pages, no?
Well, there's 400, there's almost 5,000 pages in total.
Oh, I thought there were 6 in total. Anyway, no, you're undoubtedly right. But it just... It's just really well done. It's well written.
It's well written, absolutely. Again, I'm enamored by the fact of how much exposition eventually has to get delivered at a certain point. Because again, it's not if you were doing something that was in kind of the modern world, you don't need to really describe how things work in a lot of cases, or a lot of nuances of certain stuff. Again, you wouldn't really need to necessarily do the nuance of purebloods versus muggles versus half-bloods, sort of stuff, because that would be inherent to the world that we're already in. I mean, it'd basically be the notion of oh yeah, this is a cell phone. Oh, we all know what a cell phone does. You know, you just need to look at the model and be like, oh, I know what this cell phone does. I either talk on it, I use it to surf the internet, or I use it to eventually say, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Because it's one of those very old-fashioned cell phones. But because there's this extra level of exposition that's being layered in throughout the entire book, which does a good job, I felt, of giving you enough information to flesh out the world, but enough that also says, when you come across this thing, you kind of want to go back and be like, oh, that's right, I did read that. Because again, the thing with Nicholas Flamel as an example, his name is mentioned very early on the train scene with the wizarding card.
Yeah.
And again, it's such a fleeting sort of moment that it doesn't seem very important at all. It's not, your attention's not drawn to it at all.
Yeah.
And then so when it comes up later, you're like, oh, that's right, we had heard that word before. And you kind of almost want to go back into the earlier pages of the book to try to figure out where you heard that term, so you could reread that part, and you would be smarter than the characters at that point if you hadn't already remembered.
But then, and speaking again of the wizarding cards, it's where Harry gets first introduced to the idea that something that's in a portrait isn't in a portrait. Ron's actually amazed. You mean in your world the things just stay there? They have time to just stay there? He's got other things to do.
Yeah.
And
at one point, Rick runs. So there's another kid who's in there who's got a poster of a soccer player from Manchester United, And Ron's forever trying to make the picture move, and he's just always just amazed at like
It doesn't
the guy
move.
that doesn't move, and the guy's just there all the time.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
like, what would you be doing there the entire time? Don't you have other stuff you want to go do instead? And or that you can't even talk to it at all, and he's forever trying to get it to move.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's just enamored by that.
So you get what you get is in at one point, Harry makes an analogy when he's learning the rules of Quidditch about the one ball that goes through the hoop. Oh, like basketball, and Wood's like, what's that?
Yeah.
And so you get it from. I think it's kind of cute that you get it from both sides. You get that the wizards live enough in their own world that they don't understand what's going on in the Muggle world, and you get
kind of enough rationale that like, oh yeah, this is a metaphor for what this is, so the audience can pick up on it and be like, okay, now I get what you're trying to say.
Well, and then you also have in the last chapter, you have Hermione when they're in the room with all the potions.
Mm-hmm.
She says, "Oh, this is a logic puzzle. It makes perfect sense that Snape would do this because wizards aren't good at logic."
Yeah.
At using logic, because you have to kind of eliminate, according to this, the description of the bottles and stuff, which one it is that you ultimately want. It's not this, it's not that because of this, it's not this because of this. And that's how she isolates it.
Yeah.
And but she explains, oh, that's something Muggles can do that wizards can't do.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting, because of course she's all Muggle born.
Yeah. Same. And she's all Muggle born, as where Harry is a pureblood because both of his parents did know magic, but he's just lived in the Muggle world for so long that it's all new to him, essentially.
Yeah. So it's interesting the way. So it gives you one of everything. It gives you Ron, who is full born and brought up in it, and then Hermione, whose family is really happy, but she's got
and there's a kind of a very interesting economy with that, where you have again Hermione, who isn't magical born, but is probably the most knowledgeable of magic between the two of them, because she is trying to read ahead and learn all that she can in a vain attempt to catch up. Versus Ron, who has always grown up with it, is kind of a little lackadaisical about it. Is like, this is just
takes it for granted.
Very much takes it for granted, and so he's not a very good student as a result of that, because he's just, it's magic. I mean, I've been surrounded by magic for all my life.
Yeah.
And then you have Harry, who is again also brand new to the magical world, but is kind of like a little half and half almost.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting the way that's done.
Mm-hmm. And then we get to the movie.
Yeah.
So one of the things I did actually want to mention here, do you know why there's a difference between, in America it's called Sorcerer Stone, versus in London and elsewhere around the world it's actually known as Philosopher's Stone?
No.
So Scholastic, which was able to buy the rights to produce it here in America, made a number of changes to the book initially to kind of de-Britanize it a little bit. So mom and mother, some of the ways they've rephrased they've rephrased some of the Britishy stuff to make it seem more logical for American readers who would not be familiar with these terms, and that happens frequently when you do even in an English to English language. I mean, like, there's certain idioms and common stuff, that's in
do you know what a WC is?
I don't.
Okay. In Britain, WC, and in France, they turned around, they copied it, and it's WC. But a WC is a water closet, a toilet.
The one I hear the most is again, if you go to James Bond, it's 007 instead of 007.
Yeah.
And so having worked in hotels a lot, I've had somebody tell me one time, oh, can I add your phone number to the thing here? Yeah, it's 388-8777. And I was like, wait, sorry, say what? And eventually I picked up on it. It's like, 388-37, 3677. Because it's 77 or 88. So
yeah,
and that's where you get 00 from. So again, like, there's certain idioms, and I would imagine there's very much so a lot of that stuff that happens here in America as well. We're like, because we love our idioms as far as stuff goes, and even just like even slang words that don't naturally translate to other languages very easily.
Yeah.
So, so one thing we always have to know about the movie is that, again, the book is like an 8-hour read if you're narrating it, and the narrator goes pretty slowly through it.
Yeah.
But the movie is about a 2-hour, 20-minute movie still. And so there's a lot of elements in the movie that need to be cut out in order to be able to simplify it. Now, there's a lot of stuff that just because you're describing stuff in the world gets kind of shortened down anyways, but there's a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be included at the end of the day that you can breeze past.
Yeah.
So there's some kind of pros and cons to it. I'm going to say that, like, I love the cast.
Love the cast.
I think they were able to
chosen.
Well, what I found particularly interesting is they're able to find a cast. They were able to get them for because again, all the school actors who do all the actors again really are there for multiple years playing
right down
roles.
right down to Goyle. And right down to sort of background characters that are in it.
Yeah, they played their characters for the entire length of the 10 years of production. And
then you have really quality actors who would have had other opportunities, like Alan Rickman, who are in it for the entire time as well.
Yeah,
it wasn't just the kids. Wonderful to have the kids be age appropriate through the whole thing, and be able to keep the same characters.
But great that you had the teachers, which do have this. Background of acting and then be able to kind of lead scenes and kind of be this authority figure pretty much at the end of the day. Because again, you can very much see the difference in how the children are very much kind of they're child actors. They're not the best child actors that we've ever seen in the world, but they're fairly decent in these roles at the end of the day.
Well, and you see even within the first movie growth in them as actors, improvement.
Yeah, you see them getting better, and they would just continually keep getting better throughout the different movies. I love the way that they did the castle.
Yeah,
because the castle is even more impressive than when I originally read the book and thought about it.
Yeah,
they do a great job with the castle and making it really honestly seem as if this like magical, mystical, giant structure.
Moving staircases.
Yeah, the way they were able to pull off some of the effects in there.
Yeah.
The CGI, for the most part, doesn't take you out of the movie.
The ghosts?
Those ghosts are great. I mean, the only thing that really kind of took me out was the centaur, but for 2001, I kind of can accept that because, like, even Toy Story when it came out in 98, 97.
Well, what was the James Cameron movie with the blue people?
Avatar.
Okay.
Avatar came out in 2009, 2010, I want to say.
The centaurs reminded me of the characters in Avatar.
Yes. I mean, again, like, there's some level of boundary that you kind of have to get past a little bit to recognize that, like, it is early 2000 CGI, so I mean, like, there was never going to be perfect 1-to-1, sort of thing where it's blended properly. But I mean, like, for the most part,
not bad.
It doesn't take me out of it at any particular point. So that's what I want to say right there. Also, love the music by John Williams. Like, who
did Dances with Wolves? I mean, if you look at the difference between different movies that he scored. Because it is very lyrical and very sort of magical, bippity boppity boopy.
Yeah, it's the perfect
level. Way, yeah.
It's got this perfect classical sort of nature to it that's just fits with the regal sort of majestic magicness of it. There's the certain spring of life and into it when it's playing.
It's bouncy.
So some of the things I didn't like in the movie, and this is before we get to any of the changes in the movie. As much as I do not mind Seamus Finnegan, I kind of wish they cut him out of the entire movie.
I get that because he kind of becomes
he's a background.
He's a running joke in the background.
He's just a running joke where, like, things explode around him. In the book, he's often paired with Neville Longbottom, so all the stuff's kind of happening between them.
Yeah.
But Neville's so not in the movie a lot, but he's referenced a lot in the books as always kind of just being this clumsy oaf. That you could have given all those scenes to Neville to kind of build up Neville at the end of the day. Because keep in mind, I mean, like, we will have Seamus is rarely mentioned in the book. He's there as a prominent background character, and he's always mentioned along with other people that are kind of talking. But he's never actually like doing anything of prominence at all. But Neville is always forever in trouble, or he's forgotten something, or he's clumsy, or his cauldron is melted, and he's forever doing that. And it would have been better to kind of make more note of Neville, I think, in the movie, because that would give him more prominence and agency. Because when he goes to stop Harry, Hermione, and Ron from leaving, like, you're kind of just like, who is this kid? Like, he's just another kid. Like, okay, whatever. But if he was constantly messing up and constantly had all these accidents, it would kind of make more sense, you know, or you would at least know the character that, like, him doing this was unexpected and not typical of him.
Well, and at this point in the book, you don't really understand
with his significance or his importance either.
Yeah.
I mean, in the book, I mean, like, he's just written as this very clumsy character. I mean, later books
and you get reference to his grandmother, but you don't know yet
what the significance of that.
Yeah.
I think that the ghosts were not used properly.
Nearly Headless Nick?
Well, I mean, the most
played by John Cleese.
Played by John Cleese. The ghost would have been a great element to just be background noise of exposition. You know, like a great example was where Nearly Headless Nick, again played by John Cleese, is walking around. It's like, have you heard Harry's the new Seeker? Which is not something that happens in the book. They actually try to keep it a secret that Harry's the Seeker. So they're trying to keep that secret. But like the fact that he's kind of walking around saying that out loud as other students are nearby, it's kind of like, that's not the way. You know, like I would have had it I would have had the ghost kind of walking around giving exposition as far as other stuff kind of happening in the castle to kind of make it paint this picture of more stuff happening just beyond whatever was happening with Harry. And stuff. The Baron is so poorly done in this case because keep in mind that the Baron is supposed to be this like is something that all the ghosts and everyone else fears. But he's just portrayed as kind of like a swashbuckling pirate that's kind of like sort of not that menacing. I also find that the way that they give exposition in this movie is way too rushed. In a movie like this, in a lot of cases, you try to reuse as much of the original dialogue as possible,
which they do,
which they do a really great job of. But they often, to the point of kind of missing some of the mark in a lot of cases. One of my favorite, my example of this is going to be when Harry is with the Centaur, and the Centaur saves him. The Centaur immediately starts going into exposition, almost like why unicorn, why drinking the blood of a unicorn is a bad thing. Without Harry prompting anything at all, and it's just kind of it's just real quick exposition dump while he kind of circles around him and nothing else is happening, and it just kind of stops the entire movie while you're just listening to this exposition dump of why this is bad. Versus in the book,
but at some point you have to get it in there, and you have to shorten. Something has to go.
Agreed. I mean, I think there's kind of like you could have condensed part of that here at the end of the day, to just simplify it. Somebody was drinking the blood here. Okay, well that you can shrink that down and not use the original book element, because in the book it's almost like 2 or 3 pages worth of dialogue that's going between them. And you can shrink that down a little bit instead of trying to use the original stuff. The other example is obviously going to be Dumbledore and Harry when Albus is explaining the mirror. Albus goes to Harry and asks, like, do you know what the mirror actually does?
Can you guess?
Can you guess? And before Harry actually has a chance to say it, Albus is already
explaining it rather than Harry saying it shows me
what I want. And so he doesn't give Harry the chance to answer it all, or even give that moment or at all, because they got to progress through so much stuff quickly. So those are my little cons from the movie, as far as elements of the movie. What did you want to just jump right into the changes?
Yeah, because I think that's where I have opinions.
Okay. So the first one here is that they shortened the book, like the first like 3 or 4, they drop almost all the Dursley stuff.
They drop almost all of it. They really start in. I mean, aside from the actual dropping off of Harry, which explains nothing.
Yeah, it just,
and truncates that, which is you don't know. So you start out with not really knowing who the Dursleys are.
So much as it just kind of like
you start off on the morning of Dudley's birthday, and you get that you see that he lives in a cupboard underneath the stairs. And you get that it's very much sort of a Cinderella thing, in terms of how he's treated and his position in the house.
Well, I don't think you need to describe the Dursleys quite in that length, because I think it becomes fairly obvious of how horrible they are right away in the movie. Like
it does.
You can definitely look at them and kind of just immediately make that logical leap. It's like, oh, these are the assholes. These are the horrible people. But that beginning portion of the book really does describe, like, you know, how all these weird things happening are kind of odd to the Dursleys, and which is what piques his interest in knowledge. My one real gripe here is that, again, I can appreciate that they've turned this part of the movie to basically almost like the first 20 minutes instead of what was the first 4 chapters of the book.
Right. Because you don't really find you just hear at one point you just hear Mr. Dursley saying we've got to get out of here, and then the next thing you know they're on that island.
Yeah.
And there's no explanation for the fact that there's a storm coming and why the island and
how they got out of there, or why they chose the island at the end of the day. But even more so, I mean, it's just the notion that now again, like Harry coming with them to the zoo is perfectly fine. But before Harry climbs into the car, Mr. Dursley's, you know, chastising Harry about it's like, don't you do any funny business. What would have been a great way to...
I won't have you ruining
Dudley's birthday here at the end of the day. You know, which kind of leads to the point, like, if Harry had been, like, second class this entire time, he wouldn't really be out of his way to kind of do anything to Dudley, because he would know what the consequences would be at that point. Yeah. But what you could have done here as well is you could have layered in like basically a couple sentences on here and add to the fact, you know, it's like, I won't have you doing any funny business like when you climbed up onto the roof at school during school, or any of the other weird little mishaps. And you could have had, you know, but none of that was my fault. It's like, I won't have you doing that.
Yeah.
You know? And so that way you can kind of paint this picture that, like, this is why he's chastising Harry over this and that. In that Harry, you know, has had weird stuff happen around him to begin with.
Yeah.
So you could have done that. So Harry and Hagrid in the movie, basically, once Hagrid kind of saves Harry from the cabin on the island, they go straight to Diagon Alley, get all of Harry's wizard supplies, and in the movie, they go, the very next day is that they go to the train station to leave for the train. Well, Harry's birthday is in July.
Yeah. And
school doesn't start until September. Now, in the book, like, Harry gets all of his supplies with Hagrid, and
he has the fitting and meets
Malfoy and gets the wand.
Which is like his experience on Diagon Alley is really just the wand.
Yeah.
And Hagrid buying him Hedwig.
Yeah. And then he goes back to the Dursleys, who, instead of locking him in the cupboard, give him Dudley's second bedroom where he keeps all of his toys and everything.
Yeah.
Especially the broken toys.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's this little bit of a variance on there where of this variance of time, because if the case is that Harry's birthday is in July, then you would think that, like, he would immediately go to school. That school would start the very next day in August, maybe, but that's not the case, unfortunately. Yeah. So there is a little bit of a hiccup there at the end of the day, as far as the movie goes. Getting onto the train station, like we mentioned before, Dursley just kind of drops them off at the station. Doesn't go onto the platform,
No. You don't have that whole scene.
No, yeah. So in the movie, like, Harry is walking there with Hagrid. Harry looks at the ticket and is like, "Hey, where is this 9 3/4?" And he looks back up to Hagrid, who has just disappeared.
Was there point. And it's just gone.
Yeah, which is a plot hole because Hagrid's not supposed to do magic at all.
Right.
which is not well known in the first movie, but later on. But he does mention it. Actually, he's like not supposed to do magic.
Well, they actually do tell you that they broke his wand in half when he got
in the book. Yes,
in the book
when he got
expelled. And then Harry realizes that somehow the wand's been incorporated into the umbrella.
Yeah, which I think is very clever.
Yeah,
considering like how big that umbrella must be, which by comparison to how big he is.
Yeah.
So, and the whole other bit with Draco meeting Harry, and because Draco talks about how like he shouldn't be with part of those kind of wizard family,
and that takes place on the train, as opposed to in the.
Well, so in the movie that takes place just before they're going to go
get
sorted by the sorting hat.
Banquet, yeah.
But Draco does all this on the train initially.
Yeah.
And then you've got one of the big things that I'm always kind of annoyed about with the movie is that in the book the house points are a big deal.
Right.
They're mentioned all the time. I mean, like Snape takes points away from Gryffindor because Harry can't answer what should be rudimentary questions. Yeah. Harry just doesn't know them because that's not something they've gone over class here at all yet. Snape's just basically picking on him, but they're talked about all throughout the book. They're very rarely ever mentioned in the movie, and so as a result, here like they're mentioned like very sparingly in the movie, and so like they're come up important element of the book, but not of the movie. So like they don't. It makes it seem like. And yet
they are the last scene of the movie. Yeah. So yeah, they sort of get backburnered and then suddenly become prominent again, and it feels
wherever they're important to the story.
Yeah.
But but in the book again, they're just constantly there throughout the entire thing. So that's one of my annoyances.
Yeah.
One of the
I'm going to give you one of my annoyances,
which is.
In the book, you get an explanation of, people don't want to be in Hufflepuff because Hufflepuff's kind of soft, and those are people that are good at sort of.
They're loyal people at the end.
They're loyal people, yeah. You get a little bit more information about
the different houses.
What Ravenclaw is,
mm-hmm. what Slytherin is, what Gryffindor is, like Slytherin's supposed to be the people that are. Who want to covet power, so it's usually considered like where a lot of dark wizards come from and stuff. So it's got kind of a negative connotation to Slytherin. Gryffindor is where a lot of where like if you're courageous, you get
loyalty.
You get put in there at the end of the day. So it's considered like where a lot of heroes kind of end up going to. Ravenclaw is supposed to be the smart people house.
It's the academia.
Yeah, the smart people like.
So why didn't Hermione get sorted there?
I know, right?
Yeah.
And then Hufflepuff is kind of the not necessarily weak, but these are more or less the more.
So why didn't Neville get sorted there?
Yeah, well, eventually, I mean, like not a spoiler so much, but like Neville actually becomes the head of Hufflepuff because he becomes a professor eventually.
Yeah.
Of herbology.
Yeah.
So he becomes the head of the Hufflepuff house, which is kind of meant for more loyal, kind of down to earth people, really.
Yep.
They're just mages. They're just magical folk, just in the sake for learning magic. They're not super invested in anything else.
But they're also not super ambitious.
No, but again, and it is painted kind of in a negative connotation in the book.
Yeah.
But they literally just breeze over it in the
movie. You don't hear anything about you barely hear the names of the other two houses.
No, yeah, to the point of which you almost never see their colors even. So Ravenclaw is supposed to be blue and silver. Hufflepuff is supposed to be orange and yellow. Slytherin is supposed to be green and navy blue, and then Gryffindor is red and yellow.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you rarely hear any of the other two houses. They never play any prominent part. They're not big parts of the book either, for the most part, because a lot of the house system doesn't come up a lot. But they are mentioned kind of in background because again, there's an entire Quidditch match where it's Hufflepuff versus Gryffindor with Snape as the referee. With Snape, with the intention being is that like, oh, I'm going to make sure that nothing happens to Harry Potter here at the end of the day, but I can also kind of, to make sure that everything's on the up and up, but I can also kind of be a bit of a dick and, rule negatively so I can get my house to win as well. So, la-di-da.
Yep.
which is another thing. There's an entire match missing. I think one of the big major changes that that happens kind of in the middle of the movie here is that how the kids meet Fluffy. Yeah. So again, in the book, it's because Harry, Ron are going to go to a wizard's duel against Draco and Crabbe. Hermione tags along because she's trying to stop them, and Neville's already kind of outside of the painting. They're all up at nighttime when they're not supposed to be, and they're running to try to avoid Finch. Meanwhile, in the movie, the staircase just kind of moves, and I guess you could say because they're too new to the castle that they just don't know that this is lost. They get lost. They don't realize that they've entered the third door corridor, which
the whole thing of the setup with Malfoy is gone.
Yeah, it's absolutely gone. And the trophy room is never mentioned ever again.
I think they do go to the trophy room because Hermione's
this is where Hermione shows Harry that his father was.
You were born into this.
Yeah, your father was a seeker, so you were natural at this.
Which isn't what happened
in the movie, in the book at all. Yeah. So yeah, the kids just kind of accidentally go into the third floor corridor, which you would think would be better locked up. Because the staircase just happened to move.
Yeah,
because the staircase just happened to move. Mrs. Norris catches them there, and so they run down the end of the hallway, trying to avoid Finch. Accidentally open up the door that leads into where Fluffy is, and hide there until Finch leaves. They see Fluffy in there, accidentally wake him up, and then burst out of there afterwards.
Yeah,
and go back up again, and were able to get back up to their room without issue at that point, without being caught in the third floor corridor at all.
Yeah, so the fat lady isn't missing.
Yeah, so so she doesn't actually play a role or element at all at this point.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a big changeover because it also kind of is where they kind of make more of an enemy out of Hermione at that point. But in the book, or in the movie rather, like Hermione's just kind of dismissive of them at this point. It's like, you could have got us killed, or worse, expelled.
And she's got to get her priorities straight.
Yes. Another thing that I think is kind of missing out of the entire movie is that throughout the book, Snape and Quirrell are constantly kind of like Snape's constantly on Quirrell.
Yep.
Like you see throughout the book, there's notations of the two of them having arguments, mostly with Snape, quiet conversations, almost, and
adversarial, but quiet.
Yeah, which helps paint the picture that Snape's really after the stone at the end of the day.
Yeah, but
that's not inherent in the movie at all.
At one point, in one of their conversations, Snape says you have to pick sides.
Yeah, so it's almost as if Snape's trying to convince Quirrell at this point.
Yeah.
And you get like one scene of this at the end of the day where Harry is leaving the restricted section, and before he darts into one of the classrooms, you can see Snape trying to not inquire, but interrogate Quirrell here at this point, which I think is again after the Quidditch match before the Mirror of Erised. Did you have the entire everything with the dragon?
Yeah, so Hagrid gets a dragon egg, and he hatches it, and this is how they end up in the woods. It is not Neville.
No.
It's Ron, Hermione, and Harry,
and then Draco, because Draco
follows them
and
down to
Hagrid's. Them.
Yeah, so they snuck out of the castle at night to go talk to Hagrid. Hagrid is hatching the egg. They know nothing about the egg, but they find out that Hagrid has the egg,
and it hatches right there,
and how he won it. And it hatches, and Malfoy sees it through the window, and then goes to tell Professor McGonagall, and she takes points away from Gryffindor. 50 points per
kid
from Ron, Hermione, and Harry, and then she takes 50 points from Malfoy.
Well, she says, like, then you've all all four of you have detention, and then Malfoy kind of, like, snarkily is like, I'm sorry, I misheard you. All four of us have detention? And McGonagall's basically like, well, yes, even though your act was indeed, genuine in the sense of a noble action, you still were out of bed when you weren't supposed to be out of bed, so you're getting detention, too.
Yeah.
But I don't actually think Malfoy actually loses points at this point.
Oh, okay.
But I could be wrong. so that's how, and the entire element of, when we get back to Hagrid, they're basically is like, oh yeah, you guys got detention here at nighttime, and Hagrid's like, they took away, they took away Norbert, the dragon. They took away my dragon, and Finch is just like, oh, grow up. You weren't supposed to have that anyways, but they took it away from me.
Yeah.
It's like, as where in the book, they get it out of there secretly, so Hagrid's, because you would think that, like...
And they take it up to the astronomer tower.
And that's how, and Charlie's friends come and get it.
Yeah.
And you would think that, like, if Hagrid got caught with a dragon on school grounds... There'd be more than just kind of like a finger wave at that point. Yeah. You'd think that he'd be in more trouble for that.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fascinating at that point. So yes, there's a big divergence there. Then you have during the entire getting to the Sorcerer's Stone at the very end of the book here, in the movie they're missing the potion test and the troll test. But in the movie, it's that you just need to relax. Oh yeah,
and Devil's Snare will let you through.
Mm-hmm. Which doesn't make any sense because again, like, if you were a wizard, if you were a dark wizard or anybody trying to get into there, you would be aware of plant stuff here at the end of the day. You would assume.
You would think, yeah.
So you would think that, like, oh, I landed on this plant and I've identified. If Hermione's able to identify it right away, you would assume.
A professor would.
A professor or even a standard wizard that's not in school would recognize it. Like, oh, okay, just relax and get through it at the end of the day. So that's kind of a weird element there.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, Hagrid earlier today is like, oh no, Snape's one of the professors that's defending the stone, and so you don't see the potion test at the end of the day, which is a bit of a bummer for them.
Yeah.
And then you have the entire ending fight. So here's something that kind of comes up as a bit of a plot hole, but it's actually kind of well explained in the movie. So when we were first introduced to Professor Quirrell in the movie, he's got his turban on, and it looks like everyone else has gone in to go shake Harry's hand, and Harry's kind of up there already, kind of waiting for Quirrell to go shake his hand. And Quirrell's like, no, I'm not going to shake your hand.
Yeah.
I'm going to just be so excited to have seen you and stutter. Versus in the movie, he does go and shake his hand, and and then later on when he goes to fight, when he's with Harry Potter, when he touches Harry Potter, he doesn't burn him initially, so he's literally choking him. It's not until Harry actually touches his hand with his own hand, with Harry's own hand, that he actually does damage to Quirrell. So it makes you wonder that if in the movie Quirrell was kind of already aware of the protection element on Harry at that point.
Yeah.
But he also might have just had Voldemort on him as well by then, which doesn't make sense because Harry's mark would have been hurting more if that were the case. Because Harry mentions by the end of the term that his scar hurts a whole lot more recently, but that's because Voldemort's basically at the school with him at that point. As where in earlier scenes he hadn't been. Also in the movie, Harry touches the hand of Quirrell, and his hands burns and starts turning to ash. And then so Harry's best idea to go stop Professor Quirrell is to literally grab his face, and his face turns to ash and basically kills him at that point.
Yeah.
So Harry should be going to Azkaban now, which is Wizard's prison. I think you can make a case for defending yourself at the end of the day. And then there's also and then the very last scene with Harry and Professor Dumbledore. There's a lot more exposition that gets done there between the two as they have this conversation back and forth with Harry asking questions. But a lot of it that just doesn't make it into the movie.
Yeah.
For time-wise.
Yeah. They've cut it back quite a bit.
I've also heard some weird depictions of Dumbledore as well, where Dumbledore was meant to be a little bit more sillier, eccentric almost, and that he was meant to be an older wizard, but still a very spry older wizard.
Well, he is a spry older wizard.
Yeah, but he's not shown that to be that in the movie, the first two movies, because again, the original actor that was portraying him eventually had to bow out and passed away, where they replaced him in the third movie, which I think is which I admit I think is a much better Dumbledore at the end of the day. I think, I like the older version of it, but I think this one fits more with the character of being a much older man, but still very spry and young at heart, and still very active.
Yeah,
because the actor that went on to portray Albus Dumbledore is, again, even though he's a much older actor, he's still very young at heart. He's probably in like his 60s and 70s, probably in like his 60s versus the other one, which was in his 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
So wasn't ever going to be able to do a lot of the more physically demanding scenes that would come later for Albus Dumbledore, obviously. One of the things I do like in the movie, though, is I like the way that they portrayed the wands. Because in the book, they're just described as pieces of wood.
Yeah.
Here, the wands have a little bit more characteristic to it. Like they have got handles or knots in the wood, or they're kind of shapenly a little bit.
Yeah.
So they've got a little bit more characteristics to them.
They do. They change in the final scene. How Harry, Hagrid is talking to Harry right before he gets on the train,
Mm-hmm.
and Hagrid says, now if they mistreat you,
you can have a pair of ears to go with that tail.
Well, you could threaten to do magic, and he said, but we're not allowed to do magic outside of Hogwarts. Yes, but they don't know that.
Yeah, so it's Hagrid that gives away that final line versus Hermione.
Yeah.
So, but all in all, I mean, like, if you hadn't read the book, I mean, none of this would have really popped up at all, I think.
Even having read the book, I mean, it was a long time ago when I first saw the movie, but I think I felt like the movie was really true to the book. And reading them, one right after the other, literally finished the book on Wednesday and saw the movie on Thursday, you realize, having been so close to it, that
you do see the differences.
You do see the differences, but having read the book a couple of years before I saw that movie, I thought the movie was very, very true to the book.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, no, and that's probably,
and something had to go. You couldn't get it all in.
No, you couldn't possibly get everything in there, and I appreciate at the end of the day that they kept it as true as possible, and the changes that were made are logical changes to speed it up. Some
of them were silly, though. The snake in the book is from Brazil.
Yeah.
And in the movie it's from Burma. That's silly. Because Harry actually asked the snake, where are you going? I'm going to Brazil. Because he indicates earlier in that snake conversation, he's like,
so where are you from? And he taps on, his tail kind of taps on the sign, and it says, oh, you're from Brazil. What was it like over there? And then it kind of taps it again, and shows like, oh, bred in captivity. It's like, oh, so you never knew. You never knew what your home was like. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So there's that. I mean, I think the stuff that they cut out at the end of the day is perfectly fine, and the way that they've condensed stuff makes logical storytelling sense. I mean, like, Hagrid leaving Harry at the train station and disappearing makes perfect sense. I mean, like, if you didn't have to, you wouldn't go back to the Dursleys at all. You would run away as fast as you could from that, and especially if you had the chance to go live in a house, even if you just had the chance to live in an inn before school started, like, everybody would have paid for your inn regardless. So
yeah. So some of the changes, make absolute sense. What I thought was interesting was that I felt like they in hindsight, I felt like they left in scenes that might have been dumpable, because they actually link to things that don't happen in this book but happen in future books, like him talking to the snake.
Yes.
You could have clipped that. That didn't have to be there.
Yeah, I don't think that had to be there either, and you wouldn't think that's actually a big deal until you get to the second book.
Yeah.
Which you realize, oh, that is a bigger deal.
It is a big deal. So some of what gets left in very judiciously, because it's not important to this tale, it's important to the future tale.
Yeah, and as a result, I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day here, like, it doesn't take away from the story, but does reward you later on for being a good watcher, which is kind of what happened in a lot of the Marvel movies. Like, they would mention a lot of the little nuancy stuff in the background that was always happening. But if you had been watching all the movies, you would feel like you were a genius, because I remember them talking about that. I remember them talking about that. And so you would feel like a smart guy at the end of the day because you had recalled events that were happening beforehand that are just being casually talked about elsewhere.
I was watching Thor Ragnarok because it just happened to be on a Saturday afternoon a couple of weeks ago, and I went, "Oh, okay, I know where that comes from."
Yeah,
seems so exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, so in Thor Ragnarok, my favorite part of that is going to be when he's trying to get the Quinjet to the Trelawney, he puts his hand on it, and this is like, confirm identity, Thor, and it's like, he goes through a bunch of other stuff here, and eventually he realizes, like, God damn it, Stark. And he says, point break, and that's what turns on the jet at that point. And then he's like, oh, it's like, but that's only a joke for you if you remember the first Avengers movies where he, like, where Tony Stark makes that joke of Thor at that point.
Yeah.
And again, that's one of those cases where, like, if you remember one of the earlier movies, that's where these little in jokes come from. But obviously in Harry Potter, like. And in the Marvel movies too. I mean, like, these little itty bitty points get brought up casually later on, or become bigger deals later on as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire Winter Soldier, or not Winter Soldier, but the entire Civil War is based off of the Avengers. The Avengers: Age of Ultron was basically just like, I lost my entire family at the end of that movie. You guys have to pay now for what you did there.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't. And again, if you hadn't really watch that previous movie all the way and figure out what it was, you wouldn't have understand what the one guy's gripe was. Versus here in Harry Potter, as an example,
why are you so pissed off?
Yeah, and again in Harry Potter, like, the snake talking to him seems like such a very trivial sort of thing. That was like, okay, it's a guy talking to a snake, but if you're magical, hey, maybe that stuff just kind of happens, Versus later on where you're like, oh no, that's Parseltongue, that's a big deal. That's not a normal trait to your skill to have at all.
Yeah.
So so there's elements of that which are interesting.
Yeah.
And again, I don't have a problem with that. I think one of my bigger annoyances, but I think you just never would have been able to get to it though, is that if you had to wait for all the books to come out before you started the movies, because I think that if you knew where all the books were going, you could have plotted it out a little bit better.
So you're saying what you would have left in and what you would have left out might have been different if you had been on book 7 rather than book 4 when that movie came out?
Yeah, I think at that point here you would have known what was the most important elements, and you might have condensed it a little bit more. But I also worry that if you did that as well, you might have tried to take a single movie and turn it into 2 books almost. I mean, a good example of this was Game of Thrones as an example. So, in Game of Thrones, thankfully there's a lot of material in there, so you could do a TV series for 10 episodes, and each an hour long. But each one of the different seasons are meant to cover one of the books. So the first season is meant to cover the Game of Thrones, Fire and Ice, the Game of Thrones, and then the second season is meant to cover mostly the second book, but starts covering some of the later elements as well. And so again, having known kind of where the second, third, and fourth book were going at that point, because they had been released by the time the first season came out, you could lay some of that groundwork as far as introducing some characters that would come up later on as background characters, or you could hire an established actor or somebody who would be prominent for that role ahead of time, knowing that this would become an important character much later on, as an example.
Yep.
Or rather, so much as that you wouldn't hire an actor who might, right away to be a background character, which could later become like, oh, that would be a really great pivotal character later on that has a much bigger role later.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about Game of Thrones is there's no plot armor, and you lose people that you think are really, really critical, like Jason Momoa.
You lose Jason Momoa at the end of the first season. You lose,
Robb Stark. You lose
Robb Stark. You lose Ned Stark. And you lose Ned Stark right away because you're just like, no, wait, that's the hero of the entire series. Like,
that's who we're following this for, right?
Isn't that the guy that we're supposed to be cheering and hopeful that he wins anything? That guy's the hero. The hero's supposed to win, and he doesn't win, but yet the little shit lives for 4 seasons.
Yeah.
And you're just like, well, no, he's not supposed to live at all.
Talk about Schadenfreude, though.
Oh, I know, right?
When he dies.
So it's so perfect, too.
Joffrey.
But no, I also wonder at a certain point here if Harry Potter, maybe not unlike Game of Thrones, might have been a good TV series as well, perhaps. That you could almost, that in kind of in a theory, you could almost take the entire story.
Well, you could go chapter by chapter and have that be an episode and get through a season.
I think so, but I think I think especially with that first movie, that first portion of the book, like it would have taken a long time to get to Harry Potter before he ever gets to magic school. Would have been like 4 episodes, which would have been like a month before you got into it, and so a lot of people I think would have just been like, nope, checked out, not interested.
Really? Because I found the first chapter very.
Well, I find it interesting because I've seen it already, but I don't find it all that interesting.
That's true.
I would imagine though, like it's a great way of painting the world. I think the entire Dursley thing would be a single episode.
Yeah. And
the end of the episode would be Hagrid's introduction.
Okay.
Because I think, and then the second episode would be Hagrid, Diagon Alley, and all the stuff here would finalize with them getting on the train to go to Hogwarts.
Yeah.
And then like 3 would be them introduced to episode 3 would be their introduction to Hogwarts, how magical it is, and kind of like starting some of the class kind of stuff to kind of show the nature of the world.
Yeah.
And you could end it with Draco challenging Harry at that point to a wizard's duel.
Yeah.
The next episode would be their whole entire adventure as far as meeting up with Fluffy, more school shenanigans kind of stuff, and kind of progress through there.
Yeah.
So I think you could do it as like a 10-episode miniseries, the first book, which I think kind of might work out a little bit better. So you could, especially having known all the stuff that would be there, you could definitely start fleshing out a lot of that stuff. You could start, keep in mind, like as another good example here is that in the movie, or in the book, when Hagrid arrives on this motorcycle to deliver Harry Potter, McGonagall makes a point. It's like, where did you get that contraption? And Hagrid's like, I got it from Cerberus.
Yes, and you don't meet Cerberus until
book 3.
Yeah.
And so you could start laying some of the groundwork for the little minor details that come up early on, so that you could do that. I think also as well is that if you did it, over a course of 7 years, you could get actors at that point who you could keep as just as long term for 7 years.
Yeah.
And have probably the same prominence there. Because one of the big deals, especially for J.K. Rowling, was that when they were going to make the movie, that she demanded that it be filmed in Great Britain.
Yeah.
So they filmed it purposely in Great Britain, and obviously they hired a bunch of British actors for it, obviously. Which makes perfect logical sense at the end of the day.
Well, it really works for the kids because they've got authentic accents.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, no, I imagine if you did it, I couldn't imagine having,
And there were enough of them that, as I understand it, while that was being filmed, they had their own school.
Yeah. No, you would almost have to have your own school there. There was an actual school there for the kids, and then it was like a half-day sort of thing, so you'd go from like the morning until noon, and then you would shoot in the afternoon until 5 or 6 o'clock. So, and again, keep in mind, like they were releasing a movie about every year for a couple.
Every year, yeah, they were age appropriate, yeah.
And then by the time you got to like the 4th or 5th movie, it started coming out every other year.
Yeah.
And so, I think that worked a little bit more rationally.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, like I think you could have started laying cool groundworks early on, like stuff that would have popped up in like the 4th or 5th book that might have not been referenced in the first book.
Yeah.
Like you could have had like the house elves kind of just in the background.
I actually think because I think the house elves, which obviously did exist previously, never appear in the first book, and I think that's kind of a hole.
Yeah. And again, I think, well, and again, like if you know stuff that's going to pop up in like the 3rd or 4th book, you can start laying some of that groundwork early on and start adding layers to the world, which would make you feel rewarded that you remembered stuff like this. Like again, seeing some of the elves there being, even if they're treated poorly, just as background sort of stuff, might spark Hermione's interest in them by the 2nd book and having them getting freed at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So you could lay some of that groundwork early on, so you'd have a much more deeper world, I think.
Yep.
So I highly recommend anybody to go read the book and then watch the movie.
And this was your first read of it?
Oh, no. This is my 2nd or 3rd, I think.
Oh, okay.
I remember right around the time the last book was coming out, I was like, okay, everyone's making a big deal out of this, and all my friends have told me you should read the books, and I was like, okay, fine. And I actually
there were waiting lines to get into the movies.
Huh?
There were waiting lines to get into the movies.
There was waiting lines to buy the books too.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
There were literally snaking lines around bookstores.
Yeah.
I
was pre-ordering them on Barnes and Noble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Back when you can order books on Barnes and Noble.
You can't.
I know you can, but I mean, like everyone goes through goes through the Brazilian rainforest now.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, no, I worked overnights at a hotel, and nobody would ever come into the hotel during the overnights. Again, it was a very sparse timeshare property.
Yeah.
So I basically had a laptop that I would bring with me to do stuff too. I could watch movies and do stuff at, because again, there's not a whole lot you can do after a certain point from like midnight until 6 a.m. in the morning when nobody's there, nobody shows up to save your life.
Yeah.
So I was basically listening to the audiobooks overnight.
Oh, cool.
And I was able to get it all done within probably about 2 weeks or so. Because again, I mean, like I would be there and I would listen to or 2 or 3 weeks, and I was able to listen to each one of the audiobooks within like a day or 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
So it was very easy to kind of just get through that super quickly.
Yeah.
And again, I like the audiobooks because again, it allows me to do other things at the same time. Like it could be cooking or cleaning. I can't do work and listen to the book at the same time.
Yeah, I can't. I can't
do that either. But you could be. But I like to listen to podcasts while I'm driving.
I like to listen to both podcasts and audiobooks while driving or while riding the stationary bike.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So again, I would definitely recommend reading them before you watch them, because I think what ends up happening is that if you read them, you get to still enjoy the movie and for the movie for what it is. But I think if you watch the movie first, you go to read the book, and
where did that come from?
Where did that come from? Or that wasn't in the movie, so I think it kind of biases you a little bit.
Yeah.
Another good example of this is that there was a series called House of Cards that was on Netflix. But it's based off of a British version of the show, of a very similar show, which was meant to. So the American version revolves around the American political system versus the British one. Is mostly about the British political system, and it carries a lot of the same tropes and everything. But if you go watch the British version first and then watch the American version, that's great. You get to enjoy both. But if you watch the American version and go to the British version is really slow and dry. Versus like the American version is a lot more like energy. Another great example of this is another great series called Full Metal Alchemist. And Full Metal Alchemist was this great manga series that ran for like 7-8 years, almost 8 years, pretty much. And had an original anime adaptation in 2003, which wildly diverted from the original story. Because by the time they got to like the halfway point in the anime, that had only been like 12 chapters of the manga. So it wildly diverted. So it's really quickly diverted quite a bit from the original story. They originally did a later retelling of it as the manga was ending. The manga ended 3 weeks before the final episode ended. So they timed it almost perfectly. And the newer anime actually follows the timeline events of the manga much better.
Oh, okay.
And so if you almost don't have to read the manga, if you watch the 2011 version of the story, it's just as good. So if you watch the original Full Metal Alchemist, you're fine there. But then you go watch the newer one, the one that's more faithful to the original story. You get both. You get both experiences. Versus if you watch the one that's more faithful to the original and then watch the one that's not so much, then like you keep watching the older one thinking, this is not as good. That's why. So in this case, that's why I recommend reading the books first, or listening to the books first, then going watching the movies. Because even though you'll know there's a lot of stuff cut out of the movies, you can still enjoy the movies for what they are.
Yeah, and you've already gotten the texture that the books add.
And plus, the movies also add a lot of the action that would happen in there that wouldn't otherwise be described in the books.
Yeah, it just takes place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we're going to post all the show notes as we usually do on our website at the Nerd Tutorial Podcast, and so you can see some of the quick breakdown and some of the notes I have here for that.
Also, some awesome fandom sites.
Yes, there's okay. So there's a couple different fandom sites for Harry Potter actually.
There's Funko dolls. There's everything.
Oh my goodness. Well, again, keep in mind that like you can literally go to a store to again. So if you have a Universal Studios nearby you, there's probably a Hogwarts land in there, or Harry Potter land. You can buy wands from there.
Yeah.
You can buy legitimate like wands. There, in some cases, like some of the nice prop wands are close to like $100 to $200, or you can actually make your own wand in a lot of cases. That was a popular thing for a while.
Yeah.
There's a couple different fandoms for it. The main one, though, primarily focuses on the movie timeline, versus there's a couple others which are more focused on the book timeline. So there's a couple of different wikis out there for Harry Potter, but none of them have a really cool name like Wikipedia or Alpha.
It's got to be one of my favorites.
I love Wikipedia so much.
Yeah.
I find that it's such a great name for that. But yeah, so we'll include the fan sites as well on our website at nerdtutorialpodcast.com. We continue the discussion on our Facebook group at facebook.com/nerdtutorialpodcast, which is a great way to get updated whenever a new one comes out. Or if you want to follow my Twitter page at nerdtutorial or nerd_tutorial. That's where we post, where we let people know when the episodes come out, but we also are following all of our previous topics as well, so we're now following Harry Potter on there as well. I'm actually kind of interested now. I kind of want to go watch the Fantastic Beasts series of movies, because I originally had not
those are fun.
Because I had heard kind of some negative things about it.
I enjoyed them.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of curious to see it now.
Because they're set in a different time frame, and
they're all set with adults too. So I'm kind of
with adults, and they're a little more sarcastic. I think.
Oh, who's the one guy that plays Dumbledore too? I'm kind of interested to see him as Dumbledore. Guy Pearce, or I forget what the actor's name is.
It's worth it's worth
I think
a watch.
I think if you like Harry Potter, this is a logical place to go with it.
Maybe you watch it on Monday night when you come for dinner.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
But until the meantime, we hope that you guys stay safe out there in these weird times, and we will see you guys next week.
Bye.